Why do most creepy things happen when we're alone? Maybe they're happening all the time, but we only notice them when we're alone. These 4 stories will make you double check your locks next time you find yourself alone. Welcome, fellow chill seekers, to Lady Grimm, where the veil between our world and the unknown grows thin. Welcome to Lady Grimm, where the paranormal comes alive. When I was a kid, my mom moved us from Birmingham, Alabama to a small rural town outside the city. Mom worked late on weeknights, so my older sister and I rode the bus home and let ourselves in after school. Our rental house was near the end of our road, and we shared the driveway with our landlord, who lived in the last house just past ours. It was a rundown trailer surrounded by pig enclosures with high wood panel fencing. When it was really hot, we'd have to close our windows because of the horrible pig smell. One day, close to the end of the school year, our landlord's small pickup truck drove slowly past us as we walked down the hot, humid country road from the bus stop. He had the passenger side window down and was smiling at us. He slowed to a stop, and my sister stopped and grabbed my arm. She did not like him. But as we stood there, our neighbor's German Shepherd Ruby was running towards us from her yard. As soon as he saw her, the landlord's brake lights went dark and the car started rolling forward again. Ruby was our neighbor's dog, and if she was out, our neighbor was probably working on his old car. She loved us because we'd give her leftover snacks on the way home from school. She'd show up at our house sometimes and sleep on our back porch in the shade. If you didn't know her, though, you'd think twice watching her run at you. As the landlord drove away, my sister hung back. I remembered not caring that I was sweating in the hot Alabama sun because I was giving Ruby my leftover carrots. It was uncanny how often the landlord would be driving down our country road just as we were walking from the bus stop. He would always slow down and smile. When we'd get inside the house, my sister would lock the front door behind us and check the back door, which we always kept locked. Being a kid, this just became normal for me, and I learned to lock the doors too. When my sister was in the 8th grade, her class did a week-long trip to Washington, D.C., so I had to spend that week alone after school. As I walked home alone that first afternoon, I saw our landlord's truck drive past. He slowed down, his passenger side window down. He was smiling, but it made me uncomfortable. He tipped his stained, dirty hat and asked where my sister was. I told him she was away for the week. Now I know that was the wrong thing to have said, but I was a kid and didn't know any better. When I got inside the house, I locked the front door behind me and checked the back door, which was already locked, just like my sister did when we'd come home together. I went to my room to watch TV and to do my homework. But it wasn't long before I smelled the pigs. It was a hot day, and I got up to go close the windows at the far end of the house. Walking through the living room, I remember the smell getting stronger, and I hurried to the kitchen to the window over the sink. Pushing it closed, I heard whining on the back porch and knew Ruby was looking for her snack. I expected the usual Ruby face lick when I opened the door, but she blew past me, whining and barking loudly. As she disappeared down the hall, I heard the front door in the living room close loudly. Ruby was lunging at the door now, and there were muddy boot prints in the living room. The living room that I had just walked through. When my mom got home, I told her what happened and she called the police. Since there was no sign of forced entry, the police assumed the door was either unlocked or the intruder had a key to the house. I knew I had locked the door, so the police questioned the landlord. He denied entering the house, but also said that being our landlord, he could enter to check on things as he wanted. My mom broke the lease and moved out the following week. Although we couldn't prove it, I know he was in the house. I know the pig smell was strong because he was inside the house. He was probably just behind me when I let Ruby in. He watched us come home from school every day, and when he saw me alone, he made his move. My house borders a narrow wooded area with another neighborhood just beyond it. My backyard slopes down about a foot, and I have a fence around it. There's a gate at the far end of the fence where it slopes. When I moved to Florida and into this house, I imagined creating an outdoor patio oasis with space to have friends over and relax. The house has big glass doors that face the yard, and the backyard was going to be a natural extension of the house. I even took the blinds down, feeling secure with the fence and the wooded area as a buffer for anyone looking in. But that first week I moved in, everything changed. My home office faces the yard, and just before wrapping up for the day, I looked up from my monitor, and I saw a head at the fence. It was pale, almost gray, and I couldn't make out the shape of the face very well, like it was diluted or blurry. I put my glasses on to see better, but it was gone. It scared me, but I half thought I had imagined it because my fence is taller at the back to compensate for the downward slope of the property. There's no way anybody could be that tall. I watched the fence line for a few seconds, and when nothing happened, I stood up to turn off the light in the room as it was getting dark out, and I was now clearly visible. When I turned back around, it was there again, but it stayed there, watching me from above the fence. It had no hair, just pale gray skin and dark holes where eyes should have been. It almost looked like someone was wearing a mask. I reached for my phone, looking away for just an instant, but when I looked back up, it was gone. I got up and walked to the far end of my house where it was darkest, where I thought I wouldn't be seen from the yard. I watched the fence for a few more minutes, but when nothing happened, I assumed it was some kids from the next neighborhood trying to freak me out. I put the blinds back up the next morning and kept them open just enough to let some light in. I periodically checked the fence line, but saw nothing. That afternoon, I was on a video call and looked up to see the head was there again, watching me. I must have looked shocked because my coworker asked me what was wrong. I looked back at the meeting, and then it was gone again. I checked the gate at the back of the fence. It was unlocked, which is not how I left it. It can only easily be unlocked from the inside, so someone had to work to get it open. While I was back there, I stepped through the gate beyond the fence, something I hadn't thought to do before buying the house. I had to be careful walking through the overgrown brush on the ground, and I kept an eye out for snakes or red ants. That's when I noticed the barbed wire. There were thick double coils of it extending along the full length of my property fence at knee level. I almost ran right into it. There were big palm fronds and piles of leaves and other debris covering the coils, as though someone had wanted to hide it. I don't know why it was put there, but I know for sure that whatever was watching me over that fence would have been standing right where the barbed wire was, and that would have been impossible without getting badly injured. I have cameras on order, and my backyard plans are going to have to wait until I figure out what's been watching me. I'll update when I know more. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying my stories. Leave a comment, subscribe. Let me know you're out there. I live close to my grandma's house, just outside of Lisbon, New Hampshire, which is a very small town near the Vermont line. When I was 16, she asked me to house sit while she went on vacation to Italy for 2 weeks with her friend. Nothing ever happens here, so she figured I could handle it. And I had just finished school for the summer, so I was the only one in my family with no plans. Her house is small, tucked against a steep hill on a quiet road most people don't bother to use. At the bend on her street is the old schoolhouse building. The town records are stored there now, and she's the part-time record keeper. There's very little traffic on her road, not only because it's a local road, but also because it's narrow as hell. There's a steep hill on one side, and a guardrail with a drop-off on the other side. It's very tight to get through there. I ask her all the time not to do it, but she always walks to work at the old schoolhouse, even in the winter when roads are icy. She says it's silly to drive just around the bend. On the second night I was house sitting, I set up a patio chair in the front yard to have a smoke and a beer. It was still early in the summer, the perfect time of year here in New Hampshire. As I scrolled on my phone and popped my second beer, I heard a car drive past the house towards the schoolhouse. The radio was on, and I could hear a DJ's voice as it drove past. I looked up to just catch the taillights as they drove on. It was an antique pickup truck, which honestly isn't that strange here in the summer. Everyone wants to show off their old toys, now that the roads are finally clear of ice and snow. As it roared down the road, two shapes came into view in the columns of light made by the headlights cutting through the darkness. They were the shapes of two people, possibly two young women, walking in the dark and narrow street near the old schoolhouse. Before I had time to react, I heard the impact as the car struck them, and then watched in horror as the car disappeared around the bend. It was late in the night, and I was alone in the thick night air. Disgustedly, I hoped to hear cries or groans from the two still forms on the ground. But they were silent. The echo of the sickening impact hammered in my ears as I stared at the still silence that stretched far down the dark road. As I dialed 911 and struggled to keep my voice steady, describing what I'd seen, I didn't take my eyes off the two dark shapes, willing them to peel themselves off the pavement, but they remained motionless in the road. I knew they were gone. After ending the call, I approached the bodies with dread, slowly putting one foot in front of the other towards them. I didn't want to see the aftermath of such a violent moment, but also felt like I had to protect them, or at least mark the place where they lay for when the police arrived. I checked the time on my phone. It had only been 2 minutes since I disconnected. I was about 60 feet away when it started to rain. I shivered as the cool rain hit my arms and face, and my teeth chattered from the trauma of what I'd just seen. The rain was the only sound around me now. I stopped, too nervous to approach the bodies. A moment later, headlights shined towards me as the police turned the bend by the old schoolhouse and approached me. Waving to them, I signaled to the area and the road between us, but as my eyes followed my pointing arm, I stared in disbelief at the ground. The bodies were gone. I watched as the falling rain droplets filled the dry imprint of their shapes on the rain-soaked road. The dry void darkened as it filled. I watched all trace of them disappear. The sound of the police car doors closing snapped my attention back towards them, and I tried in vain to explain what I'd seen. They made a cursory check of the area, shining their flashlights down the embankment, but there was nothing to find. They warned me about making false police reports and left. I walked back to my grandma's house in a daze, trying to wrap my head around what I'd seen. As I closed the door behind me, I heard a car approach and turned to see the same antique pickup truck thundering past, the DJ's voice echoing in the darkness, cutting through the falling rain. My husband and I spent a week at our lakeside cabin in Michigan just before the holidays last year. The cabin is set back in the woods, cozy and rustic. It's our perfect holiday getaway. One night while we were there, my husband ran to the local grocery store before it closed to pick up supplies for dinner. The cabin has a large open picture window that faces the lake, and I watched as the first snow fell, shrouding the dark stretch from the cabin to the lake. Grabbing a blanket, I curled up in a chair by the window to watch TV. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up when my husband opened the front door with the groceries. The room was chilly, warmed by the last of the dying fire. Still wrapped in the blanket, I opened the back door which led towards the lake to replenish the firewood we stored in the woodshed. As I reached the firewood, I saw footprints in the snow. They led from the lake to the cabin window, and then from the cabin back down to the lake. Carrying the wood back inside, I asked my husband why he had gone to the lake, my head still foggy from just having woken up. He looked at me confused, and I explained about the footprints. We both went outside and checked them out, my husband following them to the lake's edge, which had a thin, undisturbed filament of ice covering its surface. We keep cameras on the exterior of the cabin for security reasons, and I ran back inside to check the feed. Just after my husband had left, a man wearing a white t-shirt and holding something in his hand had walked up to the window from the direction of the lake and stood watching me through the window for about 20 minutes. He then turned and walked back towards the lake and out of view of the camera. We zoomed the camera in and recognized the shape in his hand. He was holding a large hunting knife. Honestly, a part of me wonders if he was even human. It was freezing that night, and the footprints came from the lake and then seemed to have disappeared back into the lake. There was no break in the water's ice for a boat, and he wouldn't have been swimming in a t-shirt, not in that weather. To this day, I wonder how things could have ended differently that night if the man from the lake had broken that single pane of glass that stood between me and him.